Welcome to Rev'd Up. This week we've got a lot to talk about. Tyler, it was a very exciting race at Fontana.
I tell you, it was one of the more thrilling races that we've seen this season. It seems like every week we have a race. We talk about this was the most exciting race we've seen. No, this was the most exciting race we've seen. I think Fontana tops it all. Let's get into the highlights, show you a little bit of what happened this previous Sunday down in California. You see Carl Edwards there getting geared up, as well as Jeff Gordon. First caution of the race, though, you can see David Stremme riding that high line, gets a little bit loose, circles it around, heading down to the apron onto the back stretch. You can see in slow motion there. Look at that right rear tire give way as he corrects. A nice job, though, keeping it off the wall. Here was a big incident later in the race. Doesn't seem big. Timmy Hill blows an engine going down the backstretch, but he laid down a lot of oil behind him. Several of the lead lap cars got into the wall and have to make repairs, including Mark Martin as well as Casey Kane, who right here ran into some trouble. Also, a windshield tear-off flies off a car. Poor unsuspecting Casey Kane, bam, right into the grill. Picks up that debris, though. He'd get it off later in the race. Here on lap 43, Kyle Busch and Joey Logano, who would end up settling it later in the race, dive off into turn one at over 200 miles an hour, battling for the lead. That's the kind of racing we really saw all day down at Fontana. You see Joey Logano would eventually take that top spot. Pit stops, though, halfway or close to halfway through the race. Brad Keselowski going through pit stops. You see Kevin Harvick there on the left, who was yet to come into pit as the other leaders pit, as on the right you saw there Kyle Busch. Kevin Harvick, though, you see him going through his pit stop. He would have an unfortunate miscue on pit road, left off a lug nut. He would have to come in and serve that penalty later. As you see Tony Stewart there on the left, he was the leader, and as you see right there, he's coming onto pit road as the leader. We got a little more to talk about Tony Stewart coming on later in the race, as you see him coming for his scheduled work on lap 75, and he would relinquish the lead to Kyle Busch. Interesting problem to Joey Logano, though, later in the race. You saw him have the accident there with his splitter, and we actually didn't talk about it last week on the show, how rough Fontana was, because I don't even think the drivers knew how rough Fontana was. Joey Logano, going down the backstretch, his splitter was bouncing up and down, and some of the splitter actually broke off, but I tell you, that's what made Fontana unique on Sunday, that rough racing groove and cars bouncing around and sliding everywhere, made for some exciting racing.
Yes, it did, like you had just talked about. There were multiple grooves on this racetrack, not like what we see at short tracks or other racetracks. Fontana is so big that we saw at one point 5 cars lined up running all the way down on the apron, using as much of the track as they could.
Yeah, you look at Bristol, and I believe Bristol's around 45 or so feet wide, but California Speedway, now known as Auto Club Speedway, is over 75 feet wide, and really the original racing groove has about 5 lanes, but like you mentioned there, we saw cars diving down to the apron just to get a little bit more traction on the track, and as you saw there, the cars bouncing up and down. It wasn't just like down the backstretch. The whole racetrack was rough, and when you got the multiple racing grooves and a rough surface, like cars were slipping, sliding around, and it really made for some exciting racing. And I tell you, I told a friend of this after the race, if one repaving machine goes near California to fix that track and make it smoother, I may have to go out there myself to stop them, because it was really fun to watch, and I think more tracks need to look at that, and if they have a rough racing group, to just keep it that way.
I think you're right, but it makes it hard on the drivers and, of course, the team members on the crew, because it's so hard on the race cars. It's a lot for those cars to handle, going so fast, and we had seen there, the splitters hitting the track. It's very grueling for the drivers.
Yeah, the cars, they want to keep the front end of them as low as possible to the track, because if you're hitting the track, you're actually scrubbing off speed. And so you just wanted to glide across the racetrack. But with a track like California, every time that car hits the track and bounces off, you're losing speed there. And if someone else can get through those bumps smoother, they'll just go faster and pass you.
That's exactly right, Tyler. We are just getting started on Rev'd Up. We have so much more to talk about. We've got the wreck between Denny Hamlin and Joey Logano, which wasn't shown here, but sent Denny Hamlin straight into the inside wall, which didn't have safer barriers.
I had something to say about that a little bit later, too.
Yeah. But, yeah, we're just getting started, so don't go anywhere, because we'll be right back right after this.
There are a million places you'd never consider texting. So why would you do it while driving? Leave risky driving to the professionals. Stop the texts, and together we can stop the wrecks.
Looking for these? You drive Buzzed. Could be one very expensive ride.
First, you gotta make bail. Then pay me to get your car back.
Your insurance premiums will go through the roof.
And my legal fees just keep adding up. All told, it could end up costing you $10,000.
Nothing kills a buzz like getting pulled over for buzz driving, because buzz driving is drunk driving.
Thanks for staying tuned on Rev'd Up, Leanne, for the second race in a row. A post-race fight is what everybody's been talking about.
That's right. As you can see here, Tony Stewart and Joey Logano got into it once they climbed out of their cars. You see the crews there trying to split them up. It was not a pretty scene on pit road. Danica Patrick's crew stepped in, of course, for Tony Stewart. And you can see here on the last lap of the race, Joey Logano coming down to block Tony Stewart, protect that position. And Tony Stewart kind of had to back up a little bit, give him some leadway, and he was very, very heated about Joey Logano and why he did that.
What the hell do you think I was mad about? Dumb little runs us clear down to the infield. He wants to about everybody else, and he's the one that drives like a little I'm gonna bust his.
Thanks, Tony.
Hey, let's just talk a little bit about what happened there. My personal opinion, I don't think that Joey Logano was anywhere in the wrong about going down and blocking Tony Stewart. You're going for the win. You want to win that race so badly, especially Joey Logano, who's been going through this past week. Everybody been talking about what kind of stance are you taking in NASCAR? You're getting all up on on Denny Hamlin, your former teammate. Are you Mr. Tough Guy all of a sudden? And here Joey Logano, after all this, has a chance to win the race at California to really silence all his critics, perhaps. But, you know, he sees Tony Stewart, a three-time champ, coming over his mirror. He's got to go down and block him. You're not just going to allow him the position there. And so I don't really know what Tony Stewart was so upset about. I think he would have done the same thing.
He's mentioned before when people try to, come up on him trying to protect his position, he says, they try to get into me or steal my position, I'm going to come right back at him and block that position, because as a driver, that's your goal. You want to win the race, and you're going to do everything in your power to do that.
Classic Tony Stewart, vintage Tony Stewart. When he's shifted over to his own racing team, it's almost like he's kind of cooled down a little bit. But right there, that's the Tony Stewart we know back when he was a rookie, just getting up in people's faces, not holding anything back. It's kind of exciting to see old Smoke back to his normal ways.
It definitely is. It almost makes you kind of giggle there of how mad he really got. But like I said before, when you're racing that hard for position, drivers are going to get that heated. They're going to get that mad. And I'm surprised, if we were talking about fines a couple weeks ago, Tony Stewart had to get bleeped out there a couple of times because he definitely got very heated and was throwing some cuss words in there, and it just was not pretty.
I kind of wonder if Tony Stewart's going to have to sit down at his table and write out a little thank you note to Fox for bleeping out all his cuss words in that, because if those had aired, he might be facing a little bit of a fine. But I tell you, Stewart there, I mean, he's not bipolar, but his personalities can't be. He can be friendly 1 minute, but you see that fierce, intense competitor just a split second later. And I think the sport's better when he's that way and he's really excited. And who knows, maybe he's put it behind him, maybe he's not. Heading into Martinsville, that's a track where you can get revenge pretty easily.
Exactly. I'm excited to see in the coming weeks how this all plays out, and if Joey Logano is going to kind of be the underdog and people are going to go after him. So
yeah, that's what we've kind of seen between Joey and Denny Hamlin. Of course, there was a lot with Joey and Denny that happened on the last lap of the race at Fontana, which the highlights package failed to show you. And we were going to show you the ending of that race, but due to broadcasting rights and other permission rights and stuff, we weren't able to. But we can tell you all about exactly what happened and what all the aftermath has been between Joey and Denny. It's Joey Logano and Denny Hamlin Part 2. We'll have that for you coming up on the other side of this break.
If you're looking for a new pet that your family will cherish every day, consider adopting from a shelter. Shelters are the best places to find a new pet. That's where you'll discover healthy, loyal, and loving animals, eager to become a part of your family. A person is the best thing to happen to a shelter pet, so bring home your new buddy today. To find out more, visit theshelterpetproject.org.
Today is a special day. Today we gather as a nation and as an international community to recognize the selfless decision of one of the most influential women of our time. She's been recognized by religious figures and politicians around the world. To us, she's just Rachel. But to the rest of the world, she's the woman who, after having one too many drinks, chose not to drive home buzzed. Here today to honor Rachel is the family whose lives she spared.
Big dreams and good grades aren't enough to get into college. There are actual steps you need to take. Finding someone who can help is the first and most important. For the next steps, go to knowhowtogo.org.
As we've talked about the entire show, everything is revolving around Denny Hamlin and Joey Logano this week.
It's so exciting, and when you think about it, it's really what NASCAR's been looking for. Back to the old days, really the bitter rivals going after each other, race in and race out, and it all started at Bristol, and it carried right over to Fontana. The highlights wasn't able to include the last lap, but let's give you a little bit of background info of what happened at Fontana. As expected, the two drivers just can't stay away from each other. It was Denny Hamlin and Joey Logano battling nose to nose, neck and neck, on down to the last lap at Fontana. They were beating and banging. Joey Logano trying to fend off the hard-charging Denny Hamlin. Going into the very last corner of the race, Joey Logano trying to protect his position. Denny Hamlin trying to gain the lead, heading to the checkered flag. They wash up into each other. Denny Hamlin is sent down to the inside wall. Joey Logano spins out, and look who's lurking in third place. It's Kyle Busch, lurking right behind him, just waiting for them to mess up. He said in his post-race interview he knew they'd mess up at some point. They did. Kyle Busch goes on to take the checkered flag, leaving Joey Logano and Denny Hamlin in a precarious position. Joey Logano's car was all torn up, but really the big issue here was what happened with Denny Hamlin. His wreck was a lot more severe than what people thought.
That's right. He went down and slammed right into the wall, and there were no safer barriers there, which we talked about earlier. It was just a very hard hit. His back end of his car came off the ground. I mean, you could just almost feel the impact, and it ended up leaving him hospitalized.
And what's scary about it, when they showed the replay in slow motion, right before he got to the wall, even just the way the track's designed, there's almost like a little bit of a ramp that comes maybe a foot or two off the ground leading up to the wall. He hit that. It sent the nose even further up into the wall. As you said, the car, the back of it got airborne. It was really just a tough crash that a lot of people didn't really expect to see, especially with the safer barriers and the way the cars are designed now. But as you said, just kind of a flaw. There's no safer barriers there on the inside of the track. And I just got to say, from a personal view, I don't see how in 2013 all these tracks don't have safer barriers at every single point on the track where there's a wall where a car could potentially hit it. I don't know if the track designers are like, oh, a car will never spin out and hit the wall down there. Well, it seems like they just wait for the car to hit there, and sure enough, it happens, and then they make the change. It happened to Jeff Gordon at Las Vegas back in 2007, happened to Elliott Sadler in 2010 at Pocono before they made changes there, and it's just really scary stuff. I think NASCAR will have to look into that, but really the concern here was Denny Hamlin. He got pretty torn up after that race.
He did, but as we've seen on Twitter, he actually tweeted a picture from the hospital saying he's all good, he's not good to go, but he's okay, he's going to be able to recover, and he will be back racing in about 6 weeks.
And I tell you, it's so exciting to see that smile, him giving the thumbs up, because when the cameras kept the view on the car, they saw him get out of the car. You could just see him in immense pain. He grabbed his back and he had to lay down right beside his car, let the medical personnel tend to him. They actually hauled him off the track on a backboard, put him into the ambulance, and transported him to a local medical center to get checked out. So it was pretty exciting to see him there, always the social media savvy Denny Hamlin, tweeting out to his followers that he's doing okay. Fractured a bone in his lower back, a lower vertebrae. I don't know the exact terminology of it, but that's a pretty serious injury, and sadly, I'll let you elaborate on, it's going to set him out for a little bit.
It definitely will. Hamlin, though, I didn't know this, but researching it a little bit more, he already had back problems. Were you aware of that? Because I had no idea.
I think just a couple years ago, just kind of mentioned briefly, it wasn't really a lingering thing that a lot of people talked about, but it's scary when you have a past history of it when something like this happens.
Yeah, he does have a past history, so that doesn't help him whatsoever, but a spinal surgeon actually said that, you know, he's going to be out for at least 6 weeks, if not a little bit longer than that. It could be 8 to 10, but he doesn't really know. He didn't really evaluate Hamlin himself, so he doesn't know really his condition. But because of the rigors of the race driving and the amount of force that he may get on the track, he would suggest more like 8 to 10 weeks. And I think that's a really good point, because if he tries to push it too soon and come back racing, he could do a lot more damage than what's already done.
Yeah, I think the 6 weeks is almost more of a general perspective of how, if one of us was to have that injury, you know, when it would take them to get back. But when you're in that car, the amount of G-forces that are on those drivers as they slam the car into the banking and they come out, and even if he was getting to another wreck of that, you can't predict when those wrecks are going to happen, and so that's just a chance you can't take. But luckily, the guy that spun him out, Joey Logano, was also in good spirits about it. He was sorry for Denny Hamlin, but he was very concerned about his former teammate, and some people were wondering, as you can see right here, how he would respond. He said he's wishing Denny Hamlin a speedy recovery. Hope he gets back to the track soon, and thanks to all of my fans for their support, because I think Joey was taking a little bit of flack. After some post-race comments he made, he said something to the effect of, well, that's what Denny Hamlin deserves for spinning me out. At Bristol. If he races me that way, I'm going to spin him out too. But
then,
in the post-race,
yeah, I was just getting ready to touch on that. In the post-race, right after he had made that comment on the radio, he got out of the car, had his debacle with Tony Stewart, and then he said to the Fox reporter, you know, I was just racing really hard and trying to protect my spot. I didn't mean for that to happen.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I think in the moment he's like, oh, we're rivals. That he deserves that. But he actually didn't know the severity of Denny Hamlin's issues. Like you said, he had the fight with Stewart. He's trying to debrief with his crew. He didn't know that Denny Hamlin's injuries were actually that severe. And so it was nice to see Joey there send out a tweet to Denny and let people know that, you know, I'm actually thinking about him. And actually, even before he sent that tweet out, he had actually been exchanging text messages with Denny at the hospital, you know, going back and forth, wishing you were okay. And some people may question that tweet as like a PR move. I personally think Joey was sincere. He wouldn't wish harm on any of his competitors.
And Denny Hamlin actually responded on social media with a tweet of his own. It's, you know, commenting on his back injury and things like that after finding out everything that happened and talking to Dr. Petty once he got back to North Carolina. He said, if it was up to me getting back in the car, if it was based on pain tolerance, then I would be in the car next week. There's just more to it that I can't control. So you can tell he's really bummed out about it, and it's just no race car driver. This is what they live and breathe, is racing. So for them to have to sit out, just very unfortunate, and I'm sure it's going to be very hard for him to handle.
It will, and you know, all the NASCAR community hurts for that too, because Denny Hamlin, whether you know you cheer against him or you cheer for him, he's a likable guy. So you know, I don't see how you could really hate for, or I don't see how you can, you know, not feel bad for that happening to him. He's a fierce competitor. He makes racing better, and of course, us personally, we wish Denny Hamlin a speedy recovery because it's fun to see him out racing.
Of course, but the question still remains, who is going to take over his car since he's out? There's talk about Mark Martin, because he's only running a partial schedule this season. And then, of course, Elliott Sadler, who drives the number 11 in the Nationwide Series.
I know. There's plenty of options. Mark Martin, Elliott Sadler, of course, Brian Vickers always races for Joe Gibbs in the Nationwide Series. There's just plenty of picks that Joe Gibbs can pick from, and so we'll just have to wait for the next race to see what happens. And, of course, that next race will be at Martinsville. It's going to be an exciting race. We'll talk about that race a little bit when we come back from this timeout.
What if a disaster strikes without warning? What if life as you know it has completely turned on its head? What if everything familiar becomes anything but? Before a disaster turns your family's world upside down, it's up to you to be ready. Get a kit, make a plan, be informed today. Learn how at ready.gov.
Up, college is hard. Down, those books are heavy.
My sport is football, but my passion is education. Right up here. So every year I take promising high schoolers on a college tour
Lights there, darks there.
to show them that higher education means a brighter future. My name is Nnamdi Asamoah. I don't just wear the shirt, I live it.
Find out how you can live United for Education. Give Advocate. Volunteer. Go to liveunited.org.
Do you wear this?
Hey.
Ready to go?
Yeah, but the fire's not out.
Close enough.
Close enough? If it's too hot to touch, it's too hot to leave. I mean, the next thing you know, you've torched our whole neighborhood.
Which is why we're not going anywhere?
Exactly. 9 out of 10 wildfires are caused by humans.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
There are a million places you'd never consider texting. So why would you do it while driving? Leave risky driving to the professionals. Stop the texts, and together we can stop the wrecks.
Welcome back to our final segment on Rev'd Up. Leanne, the dust is all settled from Fontana. Another race in the books, and once again, the Cup standings have shuffled up a little bit.
Yes, they have. Let's go ahead and jump right into the point standings. Coming out of Fontana, we've got Dale Jr. first, followed by Brad Kozlowski, Jimmy Johnson, Carl Edwards, and Greg Biffle. Not much separation there between those drivers, but then once we get a little bit further back, a little bit more of a separation between Kyle Busch, who's 6th, Casey Kane is 7th, Paul Menard 8th, Joey Logano, and Denny Hamlin.
Yeah, how about Dale Earnhardt Jr. leading the Cup standings? I know all of NASCAR Nation are appreciating that. NASCAR getting a lot of exposure because he's on top, but you saw Joey Logano and Denny Hamlin towards the bottom of the standings, and unfortunately Denny Hamlin's going to start tumbling a little bit because he's not able to start races. And we talked about it a little bit earlier. We talked about some people that may take Denny Hamlin's spot in the 11 car.
That's true, but that won't happen until we get to Martinsville, which obviously isn't this weekend. It's an off weekend for Easter, but coming up in Martinsville, at 1 o'clock on Fox, we've got a pretty exciting race on our hands, another short track, so I'm excited to see how that's going to pan out.
Yeah, we've had Tempers Flare in the past 2 races at Bristol and at Fontana. As you said, they get a week off here to maybe let Tempers cool a little bit, but it's going right back into a short track at Martinsville. Who knows what can happen there? I'm sure we'll see some sparks fly, but, you know, there's also some people that are really, really racy at Martinsville. Who do you think is going to take home the checkered flag?
I've got to give it to Kyle Busch just because he's really strong at the short tracks, and I look for him to be very strong.
I think that's a great pick. I'm going to have to go with a fellow Toyota driver, Clint Boyer. He was right there racing for the lead last spring at Martinsville before he took out Jeff Gordon. That whole feud started there, but that's another story for another time. But I'm going to have to go with the 5-hour energy car of Clint Boyer.
Those are some pretty good picks, if I do say so myself.
I think so, too. It's going to be an exciting race at Martinsville. I'm kind of bummed they got an off week here, but it's an appropriate off week with Easter Sunday coming up. But just lets us, lets the things settle and lets us whet our appetite for Martinsville. I love Martinsville, the short track in Virginia. A lot of beating and banging. It's just going to be fun to watch. I'm excited for it.
Yes, it will. That's all the time we have on this episode of Rev'd Up. But from me and Tyler, Happy Easter to you and your family. We'll see you back here in a couple of weeks.